The Gaza Strip, a sliver of land on the Mediterranean coast, has become synonymous with suffering. The latest chapter in its long and bloody conflict with Israel has exacted a horrifying toll, leaving an indelible scar on the human conscience. As of February 26, 2025, the numbers tell a chilling story: over 46,000 Palestinians dead, including thousands of women and children. These are not just statistics, they are lives extinguished, families torn apart, and futures stolen. Hospitals, once beacons of hope, lie in ruins, their capacity to provide even basic care decimated. Schools, meant to nurture young minds, have become shelters for the displaced, their classrooms echoing with the trauma of war. The once vibrant tapestry of Gazan society has been shredded, leaving behind a landscape of loss and despair. The international community has responded with a mixture of condemnation and paralysis. The United Nations has issued urgent calls for a ceasefire, while human rights organizations have documented widespread violations of international law. Amidst the rubble and the rhetoric, it is easy to lose sight of the human cost of this conflict. But behind every number, there is a name, a face, a story. These are the stories of ordinary people caught in the crossfire, their lives upended by a conflict they did not choose. The Gaza Strip, already reeling from years of blockade and conflict, is now grappling with a humanitarian catastrophe of epic proportions. The relentless bombardment has crippled essential infrastructure, leaving the besieged population without access to basic necessities. Hospitals, overwhelmed with casualties, are running dangerously low on medical supplies, their corridors crowded with the wounded and the dying. The lack of clean water and sanitation has exacerbated the crisis, creating a breeding ground for disease. With each passing day, the risk of a full-blown epidemic grows, threatening to further decimate a population already on the brink. The specter of famine also looms large as food supplies dwindle and access to humanitarian aid remains limited. The Israeli blockade, in place for over a decade, has turned Gaza into an open-air prison, its people trapped in a cycle of poverty, violence, and despair. International aid organizations are struggling to respond to the overwhelming needs on the ground. The international community must act swiftly and decisively to lift the blockade and provide the necessary humanitarian assistance to avert a catastrophic loss of life. The international community's response to the unfolding tragedy in Gaza has been marked by a profound disconnect between rhetoric and action. World leaders have issued strongly worded statements condemning the violence and calling for a ceasefire, but these pleas have largely fallen on deaf ears. The United Nations Security Council, paralyzed by political divisions, has failed to take any meaningful action to stop the bloodshed. The International Criminal Court has launched an investigation into alleged war crimes committed by both sides, but the road to justice is long and arduous. Israel, which does not recognize the ICC's jurisdiction, has vowed not to cooperate with the investigation. Human rights organizations have documented widespread violations of international law, including indiscriminate attacks on civilians, the use of disproportionate force, and collective punishment. The deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure such as hospitals, schools, and water treatment plants constitutes a war crime. The failure to act decisively to end the violence in Gaza has devastating consequences. The international community must move beyond empty rhetoric and take concrete steps to pressure the parties to end the fighting, lift the blockade, and allow for the delivery of humanitarian aid. The human rights organization Amnesty International, in a scathing report released in December 2024, accused Israel of committing crimes against humanity and apartheid against Palestinians in Gaza. The report, titled "You Feel Like You Are Subhuman: Israel's Genocide Against Palestinians in Gaza," meticulously documents a systematic and widespread campaign of violence and oppression against the Palestinian population. Amnesty International's findings are damning. The report details how Israeli forces have repeatedly and deliberately targeted civilians and civilian infrastructure, including homes, hospitals, schools, and water treatment plants. The report also highlights Israel's policy of imposing a crippling blockade on Gaza, which has created a humanitarian catastrophe and denied Palestinians access to basic necessities. The report's conclusions are unequivocal. Israel's actions in Gaza constitute crimes against humanity, including murder, persecution, and apartheid. The report calls on the international community to take concrete steps to hold Israeli officials accountable for their crimes, including through sanctions and the International Criminal Court. Amnesty International's report is a stark reminder of the human cost of the ongoing conflict in Gaza. Section 5. Beyond the statistics faces of the Gaza tragedy. While the staggering casualty figures paint a grim picture of the devastation in Gaza, it is the individual stories of loss, resilience, and hope that truly capture the human toll of the conflict. We remember Emin Shagnoubi, a young teacher who lost her entire family in an Israeli airstrike. Despite her unimaginable grief, Emin continues to volunteer at a makeshift school, determined to provide some semblance of normalcy for the children of Gaza. Her story is a testament to the indomitable spirit of the human soul, even in the face of unimaginable adversity. Then there is Shireen Abu Nida, a doctor who has worked tirelessly under unimaginable conditions to save lives in Gaza's overwhelmed hospitals. Despite facing constant shortages of medical supplies and equipment, Shireen remains committed to her oath to heal the sick and injured, her compassion and dedication a beacon of hope in the midst of despair. And we cannot forget Musa Ali Muhammad al-Maghribi, an elderly shopkeeper whose small grocery store was reduced to rubble in the bombardment. Despite losing his livelihood and witnessing the destruction of his neighborhood, Musa clings to the hope of rebuilding his life. These stories remind us that behind the statistics are real people with real lives, dreams, and aspirations. Section 6. The Hamas attack, a catalyst for carnage. The current conflagration in Gaza was sparked by a Hamas attack on southern Israel on October 7, 2023. The attack, which claimed the lives of over 1,200 Israelis and resulted in the capture of numerous hostages, sent shockwaves through Israeli society and ignited a cycle of violence that continues to escalate. Hamas, the Islamist militant group that controls Gaza, justified its attack as a response to years of Israeli occupation, blockade, and human rights abuses against Palestinians. Israel, however, condemned the attack as an act of terrorism and vowed to respond with overwhelming force. The Israeli government launched a massive military operation in Gaza, targeting Hamas military installations, infrastructure, and personnel. The operation, however, has resulted in a catastrophic loss of civilian life and widespread destruction. The cycle of violence must be broken, and both sides must be held accountable for their actions. Section 7. Netanyahu's calculus, politics, power, and prolonged war. As the death toll mounts in Gaza, questions are being raised about the political calculations of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Critics accuse Netanyahu of exploiting the conflict for political gain, prolonging the fighting to deflect attention from his own legal troubles and consolidate his grip on power. Netanyahu, facing corruption charges and mounting domestic pressure, has long used a hardline stance against Hamas to shore up his right-wing base. The current conflict, with its nationalist fervor and heightened security concerns, has provided Netanyahu with an opportunity to rally support and silence his critics. The continued blockade and periodic outbreaks of violence serve to weaken Hamas and prevent the emergence of a viable Palestinian state. The international community must break through the political impasse and pressure all parties to end the cycle of violence and work towards a just and lasting peace. Section 8. Can anyone win in Gaza? A hollow ring of victory. As the conflict in Gaza rages on, a chilling question hangs in the air. Can anyone truly win this war? The answer, tragically, seems to be a resounding no. The human cost of the conflict has been staggering, with thousands dead, countless injured, and a generation scarred by trauma. For Palestinians in Gaza, the notion of victory seems increasingly distant. The relentless bombardment, the crippling blockade, and the ever-present threat of violence have turned their lives into a daily struggle for survival. Their homes, schools, hospitals, and infrastructure lie in ruins, and their hopes for a better future seem to be fading with each passing day. But Israel too has paid a heavy price for this conflict. The conflict has also exacted a heavy toll on Israel's international standing, with growing condemnation of its actions in Gaza. The only winners in this conflict are the merchants of death and the purveyors of hate. Section 9. The future of Gaza, towards hope or further despair. As the dust settles on yet another devastating conflict in Gaza, the question remains, what does the future hold for this beleaguered strip of land and its people? Will the international community finally muster the political will to break the cycle of violence and work towards a just and lasting peace? The root causes of the conflict, the occupation, the blockade, the settlements, the denial of Palestinian rights, must be addressed if there is to be any hope of a lasting solution. The international community must move beyond its traditional role as a passive observer and become an active agent for change. There are glimmers of hope amidst the darkness. The growing global movement for Palestinian rights, the increasing scrutiny of Israel's actions, and the unwavering resilience of the Palestinian people all point to the possibility of a different future. The international community must summon the courage and the commitment to stand with the Palestinian people and demand an end to the occupation and a future filled with hope, dignity, and self-determination.